The carriage wheels ground to a halt before Halridge Manor, and Duke Sebastian Halridge stepped onto gravel he hadn't touched in 8 months. The estate looked different, too alive, too vibrant for a place he'd left to rot. Inside, servants whispered a name he barely recognized. Her Grace. The woman he'd married to save his family from ruin. The merchant's daughter he'd hidden away like a shameful secret. The wife he'd abandoned in the East Wing while he danced through London ballrooms. Sebastian had returned expecting decay. Instead, he found transformation, and at its center stood Clara Whitmore, the woman he'd spent 2 years pretending didn't exist. Stay until the end to see how this cold-hearted Duke's world is shattered by the woman he tried to erase. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and comment which city you're watching from. The September rain had turned the road to Halridge Manor into a ribbon of mud, but Sebastian Halridge barely noticed. His mind was still half-trapped in London, in the card rooms of White's, the opera boxes at Covent Garden, the warm bed of Lady Penelope Ashford. Anything to avoid thinking about what waited for him at the end of this miserable journey. Home, if he could still call it that. "Your Grace, we're approaching the gates," his valet murmured from the opposite seat. Sebastian grunted acknowledgement and turned his gaze to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, the iron gates of Halridge emerged from the mist like the bars of a prison. Beyond them, the long drive curved through parkland that had once been his grandfather's pride. He remembered it barren and neglected the last time he'd seen it, the grass patchy, the trees diseased. But now, Sebastian leaned closer to the window, frowning. The parkland looked groomed. The grass was thick and verdant despite the autumn chill. New saplings stood in neat rows where dead elms had once rotted. Stone walls that had been crumbling were now rebuilt. "Has the steward been making improvements?" he asked sharply. His valet shifted uncomfortably. I believe so, Your Grace, though I understand the funds came from—" He stopped abruptly. "From where?" "From Her Grace's personal accounts, my lord." Sebastian's jaw tightened. Her Grace. Clara. The woman he'd married in a cold ceremony 2 years ago, when his father's debts had finally consumed everything but the estate itself. The Whitmore dowry, £200,000 from a shipping merchant's daughter, had been the only thing standing between the Halridge name and complete ruin. He'd taken the money, spoken the vows, and left her at Halridge Manor 3 days later. It had seemed the only dignified solution. Sebastian Halridge, 7th Duke of Halridge, descended from a line of peers stretching back to the conquest, could not possibly parade a merchant's daughter through London society. Better to let her live quietly in the country while he maintained appearances in town. She had the title, the estate, and more money than she'd ever dreamed of as a tradesman's daughter. What more could she want? The carriage rounded the final bend, and Halridge Manor rose before them. Sebastian's breath caught. The house was ablaze with light. Every window glowed golden against the storm-dark sky. The front steps, which had been chipped and stained, were now pristine white marble. New lanterns flanked the entrance, their flames dancing behind polished glass. Even the ivy that had been slowly devouring the west wing had been carefully trimmed back to artistic perfection. This wasn't the dying estate he'd abandoned. This was a house reborn. The carriage stopped. A footman Sebastian didn't recognize rushed forward with an umbrella. "Welcome home, Your Grace!" The young man's face was bright with genuine pleasure. "We didn't expect you until tomorrow, but Mrs. Wickham will have your rooms ready within the hour." Sebastian stepped down, studying the footman's livery. New, well-fitted, expensive. "What's your name?" "James. Your Grace, I've been in Her Grace's service these 6 months." Her Grace's service. Not the Duke's. Sebastian filed that detail away. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The entrance hall, which Sebastian remembered as an echoing cavern of peeling paint and water-stained walls, now gleamed. Fresh plaster. New wallpaper in a subtle pattern of silver and cream. Portraits that had hung crooked and dusty were now level and spotless in gilded frames. Servants appeared from side corridors, more faces Sebastian didn't know. They bowed and curtsied, but there was something in their bearing that unsettled him. Not fear or resentment as he'd seen in servants all his life. Something else. Pride. "Your Grace." Mrs. Wickham, the housekeeper appeared at the top of the stairs. She at least was familiar, though she looked different. Less gray, less bent. "Welcome home. I'll prepare your chambers immediately." The ducal suite? A flicker of something crossed her face. The ducal suite has been, that is, Her Grace has been using those rooms for her charitable meetings. We've prepared the blue chambers for you. They're quite comfortable, and Her Grace has taken my rooms? Sebastian's voice was ice. Mrs. Wickham's spine straightened. Her Grace has been the only resident of this house for 2 years, my lord. She's made it a home again. If you'd like her to relocate, you'll need to discuss it with her directly. The housekeeper's tone held a subtle defiance that would have gotten her dismissed from any other household, but Sebastian was too stunned to respond. A servant defending his wife against him? The world had turned upside down. "Where is she?" "In the village, Your Grace. There's been illness." "She's tending the sick." "Illness?" Alarm sparked through him despite himself. "What kind of illness?" "Influenza. Nothing serious yet, but Her Grace doesn't wait for things to become serious. She's been there since dawn with Dr. Pemberton, distributing medicine and food." Sebastian absorbed this. Clara, the quiet, mouse-like girl who'd barely spoken during their wedding breakfast, was in a village full of sick people? "Send word I want to see her immediately upon her return." Mrs. Wickham's expression suggested what she thought of that order. "As you wish, Your Grace." Sebastian retreated to the library, or tried to. The moment he pushed open the heavy oak doors, he stopped short. This had been his father's sanctuary, a dark, masculine room lined with leather-bound books that no one read, thick with the smell of tobacco and old paper. Sebastian remembered it as a tomb, suffocating and dead. Now light poured through clean windows. The curtains were pulled back, revealing gardens Sebastian didn't remember. Fresh flowers stood on every table. Someone had organized the books, actually organized them by subject and author. Comfortable chairs were grouped near the fireplace, with neat stacks of correspondence on the side tables. On the desk lay an open ledger. Sebastian moved closer, his curiosity overcoming his irritation. The handwriting was small, precise, feminine. Clara's handwriting, he presumed, though he'd never seen it before. Monthly household accounts, September 1824. He scanned the columns. Every penny was documented: servants' wages, kitchen expenses, maintenance costs. But what caught his eye were the additional entries. Dr. Pemberton, Village Medical Fund, £50. School supplies for village children, £23. Winter coal for tenant families, £150. Repair of Widow Morrison's roof, £18. Medicine stores for autumn illness, £75. On and on it went. Hundreds of pounds, thousands, over the months documented, flowing from Clara's personal accounts into the estate and village. Money that should have been hers to spend on gowns and jewels and whatever frivolous things young women wanted. Instead, she'd rebuilt his home. The door opened behind him. Sebastian turned, expecting Mrs. Wickham. Instead, a tall, broad-shouldered man in mud-splattered clothes strode in, then froze. "Your Grace!" The man's weathered face flushed. "Forgive me. I didn't know you'd returned. I was looking for— Who are you?" "Thomas Brennan, sir. Estate manager." "I have an estate manager, Harold Greaves." Brennan's expression darkened. "Greaves was dismissed, Your Grace, 2 years ago, for theft." Sebastian blinked. Theft? He'd been selling timber from the North Woods without recording the sales, pocketing the difference. Her Grace discovered it within a month of your departure. She dismissed him and hired me. "She hired you." Sebastian's voice was flat. "Yes, Your Grace. And if I may say so, it was the best decision made for this estate in a generation. Her Grace has vision. She sees what Halridge could be, not just what it is. The tenant farms are profitable again. The village has a school. We've planted new orchards that will bear fruit for decades. This estate was dying when I arrived. Now it's enough." Sebastian held up a hand. He couldn't hear anymore. Couldn't process the image being painted of a woman he thought he knew. Brennan nodded curtly. "Shall I return later to discuss the harvest reports?" "Yes. Tomorrow." After the man left, Sebastian sank into one of the comfortable chairs. Through the window, he could see the gardens Brennan had mentioned. What had been a wilderness of weeds was now organized beds, currently being harvested by workers who moved with purpose and efficiency. What had she done? More importantly, why? Clara Whitmore returned to Halridge Manor just after sunset, exhausted and splattered with mud to her knees. She'd spent 12 hours in the village, moving from cottage to cottage with Dr. Pemberton, tending to families struck down by the influenza that appeared every autumn like clockwork. 4 new cases today. All children, thank heaven, which meant they'd likely recover with proper care. But that required medicine, clean water, warm blankets, and nutritious food, things most village families couldn't afford. She'd already instructed Mrs. Wickham to prepare care baskets for each family. Your Grace. One of the footmen met her at the servants' entrance. Clara always used the servants' entrance when she was dirty from village work. No sense tracking mud through the main halls. His Grace the Duke has returned. Clara's hands, busy untying her bonnet, went still. Sebastian is here? Yes, Your Grace. He arrived this afternoon. He's asked to see you immediately upon your return. Of course he had. Clara felt the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders. The weight of being an obligation, an inconvenience, a mistake to be managed. She'd known he would return eventually. 2 years of blessed solitude couldn't last forever. But she'd hoped for more time. Time to make herself so essential to this estate that he couldn't simply dismiss her again. Time to build something so valuable that even Sebastian's pride would have to acknowledge it. Apparently, time had run out. Tell His Grace I'll attend him after I've bathed and changed. The footman shifted uncomfortably. He was quite insistent, Your Grace. I'm sure he was. Clara's voice was calm, but steel ran through it. Nevertheless, I will not appear before the Duke covered in sick-room filth. Inform him I'll join him in the library in 1 hour. She saw the footman's surprise and the flash of approval. The servants of Halridge Manor had learned over 2 years that their Duchess did not bend simply because someone demanded it. She was courteous, kind, and generous. But she was not weak. Clara climbed the back stairs to her chambers, the ducal suite that had been gathering dust when she arrived. She'd claimed it not out of presumption, but out of practicality. It had the best light, the most space, and connected to the library where she did most of her work. If Sebastian wanted it back, they would discuss it. Like adults. Her maid, Annie, already had the bath drawn. Clara sank into the hot water with a grateful sigh, letting the heat ease muscles sore from bending over sickbeds all day. What shall you wear to meet His Grace, ma'am? Annie asked quietly. Clara considered. She could dress to impress, wear one of the fine gowns she'd commissioned from London dressmakers, style her hair elaborately, present herself as the Duchess society expected. But that would be a lie. That wasn't who she was. The green wool, she decided, the simple one, and my hair in a bun, nothing elaborate. Annie hesitated. The Duke might expect... The Duke will see exactly who I am, Clara interrupted gently. That's rather the point. What? Sebastian was on his second brandy when the library door opened. He'd been pacing for the past 20 minutes, irritation building with each circuit of the room. What kind of wife kept her husband waiting? He was the Duke of Halridge. When he summoned someone, they came. But when Clara Whitmore entered the library, Sebastian's prepared lecture died on his lips. He'd seen her exactly 3 times before, at their first meeting arranged by their fathers, at the wedding itself, and at the brief, awkward wedding breakfast. Each time she'd been dressed in elaborate gowns clearly chosen by someone else, her brown hair pinned into uncomfortable-looking styles, her face painted with cosmetics that made her look like a nervous doll. The woman before him now was entirely different. She wore a simple green dress that looked warm and practical rather than fashionable. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun that revealed a face free of cosmetics, a face that was striking in its natural clarity. High cheekbones, intelligent gray eyes, a mouth that suggested both strength and compassion. She wasn't beautiful in the porcelain, delicate way London debutantes were beautiful, but there was something arresting about her, something real. Your Grace, she curtsied, a perfect curtsy, he noted with surprise. Someone had taught her well. Welcome home. Her voice was low and steady, not the timid whisper he remembered from their wedding. Clara. He set down his brandy glass. You've made changes. I've made improvements, she corrected quietly. The estate was failing. I stopped it from failing further. With your money. With my dowry, yes, which became the estate's money upon our marriage, as I understand it. I simply chose how to invest it. Sebastian felt his jaw tighten. She was right, of course. Legally, everything she'd brought to the marriage belonged to him, but something in her tone suggested she didn't see it that way. You dismissed Greaves. I dismissed a thief. Would you have preferred I let him continue stealing from you? You hired a new estate manager without consulting me. You weren't here to consult. Clara moved to one of the chairs near the fireplace and sat with perfect posture. Thomas Brennan came highly recommended by the Earl of Ashford. His work speaks for itself. The harvest this year will bring in twice what it did 2 years ago. You've taken my chambers. I've used the empty chambers that were gathering dust. For the first time, a hint of emotion entered her voice. If you wish me to relocate, Sebastian, simply say so. I'll have my things moved by morning. He opened his mouth to say yes, then stopped. Because the truth was, he didn't want these rooms. He wanted his London townhouse, his club, his freedom. Halridge Manor was just a place he was obligated to visit occasionally. That won't be necessary, he said stiffly. The blue chambers are adequate. They're more than adequate. I had them completely refurbished last spring. Of course she had. Sebastian studied his wife, truly looked at her for the first time. Why? Why what? Why any of this? He gestured around the library toward the house beyond. You could have lived here comfortably doing nothing. You had money, a title, an estate. Why work yourself to exhaustion rebuilding something that wasn't your responsibility? Clara met his gaze steadily. Those gray eyes held something he couldn't quite name. Not anger, not resentment. Something deeper. Because it was mine, she said simply. The moment I spoke vows in that church, Halridge became mine. These people became mine. This legacy became mine. I'm not capable of watching something that belongs to me crumble through neglect. Even though He stopped. Even though you left me here like unwanted furniture? Clara's voice remained calm, but the words struck like daggers. Even though you made it abundantly clear I was an embarrassment you'd rather hide? Yes, Sebastian, even though... Silence fell between them. Outside, rain pattered against the windows. The servants seem loyal to you, Sebastian said finally. The servants are loyal to someone who treats them as human beings rather than tools. Clara stood, moving to the window. When I arrived, they were terrified. Greaves had been brutal. Wages were months in arrears. Mrs. Wickham's daughter was dying of consumption, and she couldn't afford medicine. The kitchen staff were half-starved because Greaves sold the food meant for them. She turned back to face him. I changed that. I paid the wages owed. I paid for Mrs. Wickham's daughter's treatment, successfully, I'm happy to say. I ensured the staff were fed properly, clothed properly, treated properly. In return, they've given me loyalty and dedication that money alone could never buy. Sebastian felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Shame. He'd never given a thought to the servants' welfare. They were just there. Background noise in the life of a duke. And the village? He asked. The village was starving. Your tenants were being charged rents they couldn't possibly pay while receiving no support in return. Their cottages were falling apart. Their children had no education. When illness struck, they died because they couldn't afford doctors or medicine. Clara's voice remained steady, but Sebastian heard the passion beneath it. I reduced rents to sustainable levels. I established a fund for cottage repairs. I hired a teacher and opened a school. I work with Dr. Pemberton to provide medical care to those who need it. And I started the garden project, medicinal herbs that the village women can harvest and sell, creating income independent of the harvest. You've made yourself indispensable. I've made myself useful, Clara corrected. There's a difference. I don't want gratitude or worship, Sebastian. I want a functioning estate where people can live with dignity and hope, where children can grow up healthy and educated, where no one dies of preventable illness because they're poor. She moved toward the door, then paused. I understand my presence here is an inconvenience to you. I understood that from the moment you left 3 days after our wedding. But whether you're in residence or not, I will continue to do what I've been doing. This estate needs someone who cares about it. If you won't be that person, then I will. Clara. Good night, Your Grace. I rise at dawn. If you need anything, Mrs. Wickham can assist you. She was gone before he could respond, the door closing softly behind her. Sebastian stood alone in the library he didn't recognize, in a house he no longer understood, and felt the foundations of his world shift beneath his feet. He'd expected to return to a docile, forgettable wife who would be pathetically grateful for his attention. Instead, he'd found a duchess who didn't need him at all. That night, Sebastian lay awake in the blue chambers, staring at ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs. Work Clara had commissioned, no doubt. Through the walls, he could hear the sounds of the house settling, a house that was alive in a way it had never been during his father's time. His mind kept returning to Clara's words. Whether you're in residence or not, I will continue to do what I've been doing. She hadn't asked permission, hadn't begged him to stay or pay attention to her. She'd simply stated a fact. She was going to keep being the Duchess of Halridge, and his opinion on the matter was irrelevant. It was infuriating. It was also, Sebastian was beginning to realize, magnificent. He thought of the ledgers in the library, the careful accounting of every penny spent, the servants who moved with pride instead of fear, the parkland restored to beauty, the village saved from poverty and disease, all Clara's work, all done without him, all done despite him. For the first time in his life, Sebastian Halridge faced an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps nobility wasn't something you inherited. Perhaps it was something you earned through actions, through sacrifice, through caring about something beyond yourself. And by that measure, Clara Whitmore was far more noble than he would ever be. The thought should have angered him. Instead, it sparked something else, something dangerous, curiosity. He wanted to understand this woman he'd married, wanted to see what else she'd accomplished, wanted to know who she really was beneath the quiet exterior. Tomorrow, he decided, he would watch. He would observe the daily routine of Halridge Manor and see exactly what his wife had created in his absence. Then perhaps he would understand why the servant spoke her name with reverence, while his own title commanded only dutiful respect. Sebastian closed his eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. Outside his window, the rain continued to fall on gardens his wife had planted, on stones his wife had repaired, on a legacy his wife had saved. And somewhere in the ducal chambers he'd surrendered without a fight, Clara Whitmore, the merchant's daughter he'd tried to erase, slept peacefully, dreaming dreams he couldn't begin to imagine. The Duke had come home, but the Duchess had been there all along. Sebastian woke to voices beneath his window, not the harsh barking of orders he remembered from his father's time, but something else. Laughter, conversation, the easy rhythm of people who worked together willingly. He rose and moved to the window. Dawn light spilled across the courtyard where a group of servants were loading a wagon with crates and baskets. Mrs. Wickham supervised while a young maid, Annie, if Sebastian remembered correctly, checked items against a list. 3 dozen blankets, 4 crates of preserved vegetables, 200 pounds of coal, medical supplies. Annie's voice carried clearly in the crisp morning air. "And the toys?" another voice called. Clara's voice. Sebastian's hand tightened on the curtain. His wife stood near the wagon, dressed in a simple gray dress and wool cloak, her hair already pinned back for the day's work. She looked nothing like a duchess, everything like someone about to spend hours in physical labor. "Already loaded, Your Grace," Mrs. Wickham replied. "The village children will be thrilled." "It's not charity if they think it's charity," Clara said firmly. "Make sure the parents understand these are early gifts for the harvest festival. Pride matters, especially when people have little else." She climbed onto the wagon seat herself, taking the reins from a startled footman. "I'll be back by afternoon. If His Grace asks, tell him I'm visiting tenants." The wagon rolled away before Sebastian could decide whether to call down to her. He watched until it disappeared beyond the gates, trailing a small parade of servants on foot. What kind of duchess drove her own wagon? He dressed quickly, descended to the breakfast room, and found it empty except for a footman arranging covered dishes on the sideboard. "Her Grace doesn't take breakfast?" Sebastian asked. The footman looked uncomfortable. "Her Grace takes bread and tea in the kitchen before dawn, Your Grace. She says she can't eat a full meal knowing others are hungry." Sebastian filled a plate with eggs and bacon, feeling oddly guilty about the abundance. He ate alone, the silence broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the distant sounds of the house waking fully to life. After breakfast, he decided to do what he'd planned: observe. He would shadow Clara's daily routine and see exactly what she did with her time. But Clara was already gone, and Sebastian found himself wandering the house like a ghost in his own home. The morning room had been transformed into a sort of office. Ledgers lined the shelves, meticulously organized by year and category. A large desk held neat stacks of correspondence, letters from tenants, invoices from suppliers, reports from Brennan about various estate projects. Sebastian picked up a letter at random. It was from a tenant named John Wheeler, thanking Her Grace for the loan of tools and seed after a barn fire had destroyed his equipment. The gratitude in every line was genuine, almost worshipful. Another letter, from a widow named Mrs. Ashton, described how the school Clara had established had given her son hope for a future beyond tenant farming. The boy was learning mathematics and could perhaps someday apprentice with a surveyor. Letter after letter painted the same picture: lives changed, futures opened, dignity restored. All because of Clara. Sebastian set down the letters and moved to the windows overlooking the south gardens. Workers moved through the herb beds, village women, he realized, not estate servants. They harvested lavender and chamomile, working with the easy competence of people who'd been trained well. Beautiful, isn't it? Sebastian turned. Thomas Brennan stood in the doorway, hat in hand. The herb gardens? Sebastian asked. The whole operation. Her Grace researched which herbs had medicinal and commercial value, then designed those beds to maximize production. The village women tend them in exchange for a share of the profits. Last quarter, they earned enough to buy winter coats for every child in the village. Brennan moved to stand beside Sebastian at the window. She doesn't do charity, Your Grace. She creates opportunities. There's a difference. So everyone keeps telling me, Sebastian muttered. Because it's true. Brennan's voice held a challenge. I've managed estates for 20 years. I've worked for earls and viscounts who thought themselves enlightened, but I've never seen anyone transform a dying estate into a thriving community the way Her Grace has. She doesn't just give orders, she understands every detail of how this place works. Ask her about crop rotation, she can discuss it like an agronomist. Ask about household management, she knows the cost of every candle and grain of salt. She's extraordinary. The admiration in Brennan's voice was unmistakable. Sebastian felt an unfamiliar emotion stir in his chest. Jealousy. Ridiculous. This was his estate manager, not a rival, but the feeling persisted. Where did she go this morning? Sebastian asked abruptly. The North Cottages. 3 families need repairs before winter, and Her Grace likes to assess the work personally. She'll be measuring timber and calculating materials. Brennan paused. She doesn't trust others to determine what's adequate for people to live in. Says she's the Duchess, so their living conditions are her responsibility. Sebastian absorbed this. While he'd been dancing at balls in London, Clara had been measuring timber for cottage repairs. I'd like to see these improvements for myself, he said suddenly. Can you take me on a tour of the estate? Brennan's eyebrows rose. Of course, Your Grace. I'll have horses saddled. An hour later, Sebastian rode through his estate with new eyes. Brennan pointed out improvements Sebastian had barely noticed from the carriage. New drainage ditches that prevented field flooding, rebuilt stone walls that kept livestock secure, a new bridge across the stream that served 3 tenant farms. Her Grace personally approved every project, Brennan explained. She walks the estate weekly, talking to tenants, identifying problems. Then she works with me to prioritize solutions based on impact and cost. They reached the North Cottages where Clara's wagon stood empty. Voices carried from inside the largest cottage. Clara's voice, calm and authoritative, discussing load-bearing walls with someone who sounded like a carpenter. Sebastian dismounted and approached the open door. Clara stood in the center of a cottage that was being gutted and rebuilt. Her gray dress was dusty, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She held a measuring tape while a weathered carpenter took notes. The support beam here is rotted through, she was saying. It needs to be replaced completely, not patched. I won't have this family living under a roof that might collapse in the next storm. That'll add another 15 pounds to the cost, Your Grace, the carpenter warned. Then it adds 15 pounds. Their safety isn't negotiable, Mr. Peters. Clara turned to demonstrate something about the wall structure and froze when she saw Sebastian in the doorway. For a moment, neither spoke. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight between them. "Your Grace," Clara said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "I didn't expect you." "Clearly." Sebastian stepped inside, ducking under the low beam. "Brennan is showing me the estate improvements. He says you approve every project personally." "I do. I find that decisions made from an office rarely account for the reality of how people actually live." She turned back to the carpenter. "Mr. Peters, please proceed with the beam replacement and add proper insulation to the walls. The Hendersons have a new baby. They'll need the warmth." "Yes, Your Grace." Clara moved past Sebastian into the sunlight, pulling her sleeves down. He followed, aware of Brennan watching them with poorly concealed interest. "You didn't need to come all this way," Clara said quietly. "Brennan could have shown you the ledgers." "Ledgers don't show me you standing in a half-demolished cottage measuring support beams. Someone has to ensure the work is done properly. That someone could be Brennan, or a hired surveyor." Clara's gray eyes met his steadily. "Could be, but I prefer to see things myself. I find men tend to have different standards for adequate when it comes to housing the poor versus housing themselves." The accusation in her words was subtle but unmistakable. Sebastian felt heat rise in his face. "You think I would allow my tenants to live in squalor?" "I think you wouldn't notice either way," Clara replied calmly. "You weren't here to notice. I was." She walked to the wagon and began checking the remaining supplies, clearly dismissing him. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Clara!" "Your Grace!" A boy came running up the path, gasping for breath. One of the village children, perhaps 10 years old. "Your Grace, you need to come quick. It's my ma. She's fallen, and she can't get up. She's bleeding something awful." Clara's entire demeanor changed in an instant. "Where?" "Our cottage, ma'am. She was fixing the roof, and—" Clara was already climbing onto the wagon. "Get in. Show me." The boy scrambled up beside her. Clara snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. Sebastian stood frozen for a moment, then swung onto his horse. "Brennan, fetch Dr. Pemberton. Send him to—" He looked at the boy. "Miller's cottage," the boy called back. Sebastian spurred his horse after the wagon. Clara drove like someone who'd been handling horses her entire life, taking corners with skill that surprised him. Within minutes, they reached a small cottage where a woman lay crumpled on the ground, blood seeping from a gash on her head. A ladder lay toppled beside her. Clara was off the wagon before it fully stopped. She dropped to her knees beside the woman, already pressing a clean cloth to the wound. "Mrs. Miller, can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered. "Your Grace? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. The roof was leaking, and I thought I could—" "Hush now. Don't try to move." Clara's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for other injuries. "Sebastian, I need the medical kit from the wagon. Black bag, under the seat." It took him a moment to register that she'd given him an order. Then he was moving, retrieving the bag and bringing it to her. Clara worked quickly, cleaning the wound, checking the woman's pupils, feeling for broken bones. Likely concussion, possible cracked ribs. Nothing life-threatening if we're careful. "Should we wait for the doctor?" Sebastian asked. "Dr. Pemberton is 3 miles away. She needs to be stabilized now." Clara looked up at the Miller boy. "Tommy, get blankets from inside. We need to keep your mother warm. And water, clean water." The boy ran. Clara continued her examination, speaking to Mrs. Miller in a low, calm voice. "You're going to be fine. I'm going to have Sebastian and Tommy help move you inside, then Dr. Pemberton will come check on you. No more climbing ladders, understand? If something needs repair, you send word to the manor." "Can't afford to, Your Grace," Mrs. Miller whispered. "You're not paying for it. Cottage maintenance is my responsibility as landlord. Your responsibility is healing." By the time Dr. Pemberton arrived 20 minutes later, Clara had Mrs. Miller settled in bed, wound cleaned and bandaged, and had assessed every injury. The doctor examined her work and nodded approvingly. "Excellent care, Your Grace. You should have been a physician." "Women aren't allowed to be physicians," Clara replied. "So I learned what I could anyway." She stood, her dress stained with blood, and turned to Tommy. "Your mother will need care for the next few weeks. I'll send Mrs. Wickham's daughter. Sarah has nursing experience. She'll stay here and help until your mother is mobile again. Your Grace, we can't pay. I'm not asking you to pay. I'm asking you to let Sarah help. She needs the experience, and your mother needs the care. Everyone benefits. Clara walked outside, and Sebastian followed. She stood in the small yard staring at the damaged roof. The leak needs to be repaired before the next rain, she said quietly. I'll send workers from the manor. Good. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The weight of responsibility she carried alone. This is what I do, Sebastian, every day. Someone is always hurt or sick or struggling. Someone always needs help. And I'm the only one who can give it because you're not here, and even when you are, you don't see them. I see them now. Do you? Or do you just see me playing Duchess, making myself feel important? The bitterness in her voice surprised him. Is that what you think I believe? I don't know what you believe. I don't know you at all. Clara began walking back toward the wagon. Just as you don't know me. We're strangers who happen to share a name and a house. That's all we've ever been. Sebastian caught her arm. Then let me know you. She stared at him. Why? So you can return to London in a week and forget I exist again? I've built a life here, Sebastian. A life that doesn't need you. I don't need your temporary interest or your guilty conscience. I need you to either commit to this estate and these people, or stay away and let me do what needs to be done. What if I want to commit? Then prove it. She pulled her arm free. But I won't hold my breath. She climbed onto the wagon and drove away, leaving Sebastian standing in the yard of a cottage he'd never noticed before, on land that was his by birth, but hers by right of care. Brennan rode up beside him. Quite a woman, isn't she? She hates me, Sebastian said quietly. No, Your Grace, she doesn't hate you. She's just stopped hoping you'll change. Brennan turned his horse. There's a difference. That night, Sebastian attended dinner in the formal dining room for the first time since his return. Clara sat at the opposite end of the long table, the distance between them symbolic and deliberate. They ate in silence, servants moving like ghosts between them. Finally, Sebastian set down his fork. I want to help. Clara looked up. With what? With whatever you do, the estate work, the village, all of it. Show me. Why? Because Brennan is right. Because the servants are right. Because everyone who speaks about you does so with respect and admiration. And I'm the only person connected to this estate who's done nothing to earn either. He paused. And because you're my wife, and I've treated you abominably, and I'd like to do better. Clara studied him for a long moment. Pretty words, Sebastian, but I've learned that people rarely change their fundamental nature. You are a duke who belongs in London society. I am a merchant's daughter who belongs here. Those realities won't change no matter how guilty you feel. Let me try. Why should I? So you can ease your conscience for a few weeks before returning to your real life. I don't need a part-time partner, Sebastian. This work is relentless. It doesn't pause because you're bored or tired or would rather be at a ball. I understand that. Do you? Clara's voice sharpened. Do you understand what it means to be woken at 3 a.m. because someone is dying and you're the only one who can afford to pay the doctor? Do you understand what it feels like to have a mother beg you for help feeding her children? Do you understand the weight of knowing that every decision you make affects whether people live in warmth or freeze in winter? She stood, her napkin falling to the floor. This isn't a game or a hobby, Sebastian. This is life and death. And I won't let you treat it as some temporary amusement to satisfy your curiosity. Then what would satisfy you? Sebastian stood as well, his voice rising to match hers. What would prove I'm serious? Time, consistency, actually being here when things are difficult instead of just observing when it's convenient. Clara's eyes blazed. But most of all, I need you to understand that these people aren't your subjects or your inferiors. They're human beings who deserve dignity and respect regardless of their birth. Until you truly believe that, nothing else matters. She swept from the room, leaving Sebastian alone with the silent servants and his own inadequacy. He wanted to follow her, wanted to argue, to defend himself, to make her understand. But the truth was, he couldn't defend himself. Everything she'd said was accurate. He had treated this estate and everyone in it as beneath his notice. He had taken the money from Clara's dowry and given nothing in return except a name that meant less and less with each passing day. Mrs. Wickham appeared in the doorway. "Will your grace require anything else?" Sebastian looked at the housekeeper, really looked at her, saw the lines of age and worry in her face, the hands roughened by work, the weariness that came from decades of service. "Mrs. Wickham, may I ask you something?" She stiffened slightly. "Of course, your grace. What was it like here before Clara arrived? Be honest." The housekeeper's expression shifted. "It was difficult, your grace. Mr. Greaves was not a kind man. He saw us as expenses to be minimized rather than people. Many of us were close to leaving, despite having nowhere to go. And now? Now we have hope." Mrs. Wickham's voice softened. "Her grace treats us as she would want to be treated herself. She asks about our families. She ensures we have proper food and rest. When my daughter fell ill, she paid for treatment that saved her life. She didn't have to do that, but she did, because she cares." "She's a better person than I am," Sebastian said quietly. "That's not for me to say, your grace. But I will say this. We would follow her grace into fire if she asked. That kind of loyalty isn't bought. It's earned through consistent kindness and genuine care." Mrs. Wickham curtsied. "Will that be all?" "Yes. Thank you." Alone again, Sebastian extinguished the candles and stood in the darkness. Through the windows, he could see lights in the village below. Cottages where families lived because Clara had ensured they could afford to stay. Children who could read because Clara had built a school. People who would survive the winter because Clara had thought ahead to their needs. His wife had saved this estate, had saved these people, had created something meaningful from the ruins he'd abandoned, and he'd given her nothing in return except loneliness and dismissal. The shame of it burned like acid. Sebastian climbed the stairs to the blue chambers and found a note slipped under his door. Clara's handwriting. "If you truly wish to help, meet me in the kitchen at dawn. Bring your pride. You'll need to set it aside." He held the note, reading it 3 times. An invitation, or perhaps a test. Either way, he would be there. That night, for the second time since returning to Halridge Manor, Sebastian lay awake while the house settled around him. But this time his thoughts weren't consumed with confusion or wounded pride. They were consumed with a single question. Could a man born to privilege learn to serve? Could a duke who'd spent his life taking learn to give? Could Sebastian Halridge become worthy of the woman who'd taken his name and made it mean something again? He didn't know, but for the first time in his life, he wanted to try. Outside his window, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The estate slept under Clara's careful stewardship. And in the ducal chambers, the duchess who'd asked for nothing and given everything prepared for another day of endless work. The house held its breath, waiting to see if the duke would finally wake up. Dawn would tell. Dawn came cold and gray, but Sebastian was already awake when the first light touched his window. He'd barely slept, his mind circling endlessly around Clara's note and the challenge it contained. Bring your pride. You'll need to set it aside. He dressed in his oldest clothes, hunting gear he hadn't worn in years, and made his way down the servants' stairs. The house was already alive with activity. Scullery maids scrubbed pots, footmen polished silver, and the smell of baking bread filled the corridors. The kitchen was warm and crowded. Mrs. Wickham directed operations from near the great stove, while Clara sat at the long wooden table with a ledger, a cup of tea cooling beside her elbow. She wore a faded blue dress and an apron, her hair twisted into a simple braid. She looked up when Sebastian entered. For a moment, surprise flickered across her face. She hadn't actually expected him to come. "You're here," she said. "I'm here." Clara closed the ledger and stood. "Mrs. Wickham, we'll need 3 dozen meat pies for the village distribution today. And the medicine boxes. Are they ready?" "Ready, your grace. Young Thomas loaded them on the cart an hour ago." "Good." Clara turned to Sebastian. "We distribute food and medicine to the village every Tuesday and Friday. The elderly and infirm can't always make the journey to the manor, so we bring it to them. Today you'll help carry boxes and speak to the families. Can you do that?" "Of course." "I don't mean can you physically carry boxes. I mean, can you speak to these people as equals? Can you listen to their concerns without condescension? Can you sit in a cottage that smells of sickness and poverty and treat its inhabitants with the same respect you'd show a duchess?" The question hung in the warm air. Around them, the kitchen staff had gone quiet, listening. I can try, Sebastian said. Trying isn't enough. Either you can or you can't. Sebastian met her gaze steadily. Then yes, I can. I... Clara studied him for another long moment, then nodded. We leave in 10 minutes. Eat something first. We won't stop until afternoon. The distribution route took them to every corner of the village. At each cottage, Clara entered with baskets of food and parcels of medicine, speaking to the occupants by name, asking detailed questions about their health and circumstances. Sebastian followed, carrying boxes, and discovered that watching Clara work was like watching a master craftsman. She remembered everything: which child had a cough last week, whose rheumatism worsened in damp weather, who needed extra blankets before winter arrived. At the Ashton cottage, an elderly widow greeted them with tears in her eyes. Your Grace, I don't know how to thank you. The medicine you sent last week, my joints haven't hurt this little in years. I'm glad it's helping, Mrs. Ashton. I've brought more, enough for the winter. Clara glanced at Sebastian. My husband, the Duke, wanted to meet you personally. Mrs. Ashton's expression shifted, wariness replacing gratitude. She curtsied stiffly. Your Grace. Sebastian suddenly understood the test. These people trusted Clara. They did not trust him. He was the lord who'd taken their rents and given nothing back, the aristocrat who'd never bothered to learn their names. Mrs. Ashton, he said carefully, Clara tells me you've been suffering from arthritis for some time. Is the cottage warm enough? Sometimes these older buildings can be drafty. The widow blinked, surprised by the question. It's adequate, Your Grace. Adequate isn't the same as comfortable. I'll have someone inspect the windows and doors. If there are drafts, we'll seal them before the first frost. Mrs. Ashton looked to Clara, as if seeking permission to believe him. Clara's expression remained neutral. That's very kind, Your Grace, the widow said finally. They moved on. At each stop, Sebastian forced himself to truly see the people before him, not as tenants or subjects, but as individuals with names and histories and struggles. A young mother with 3 children under 5 who was exhausted to the bone, an old man whose son had died in the war and who now lived alone, a family of 6 crowded into a 2-room cottage. Clara moved among them like a shepherd tending her flock, and Sebastian began to understand the depth of knowledge required to do what she did. She wasn't performing charity, she was managing a complex web of human needs with limited resources and infinite compassion. By midday, they'd visited 15 cottages. Sebastian's arms ached from carrying boxes, and his head spun with names and faces and problems. They stopped to water the horse near the village green, where a handful of children played despite the cold. You're quiet, Clara observed. I'm overwhelmed, Sebastian admitted. How do you keep track of it all? Every person's needs, every cottage's condition, I pay attention. I write things down. I care enough to remember. Clara checked the remaining boxes in the cart. 5 more stops, then we're done for today. Clara. Sebastian caught her hand before she could climb back onto the cart. I understand now what you've been doing, the weight of it. I don't know how you've managed alone for 2 years. I managed because I had to, because no one else would. She pulled her hand free, but her voice had lost some of its hardness. The question isn't whether you understand, Sebastian. It's whether you'll stay long enough to help bear the weight. Before he could answer, a rider appeared on the road from the north, galloping hard. Dr. Pemberton, his face grim. Your Grace! He reined his horse beside the cart, breathing hard. There's fever in the village. North End. 3 families, maybe more. Children mostly, but spreading fast. Clara's entire body tensed. What kind of fever? Hi, violent chills, vomiting. I've seen it before. It's the typhoid strain that came through 5 years ago. Killed a dozen people. Sebastian felt ice form in his stomach. Typhoid. He'd heard of the last outbreak. His father had forbidden anyone from Halridge Manor to enter the village for 3 months. Clara was already turning the cart. Which cottages? Davies, Thompson, and Miller. But, Your Grace, you can't. I can and I will. Sebastian, you need to return to the manor. Absolutely not. This isn't a request. Typhoid is deadly. If you've never been exposed, neither have you, Sebastian interrupted. And if you're going, I'm going. Sebastian. We don't have time to argue. He met her eyes. You asked if I would stay to help. This is my answer. For the first time since he'd returned to Halridge, Clara looked at him with something other than wariness or contempt. Something that might have been respect.
Then we do exactly as I say. No arguments. Understood? Understood. They rode hard for the north end of the village, Dr. Pemberton trailing behind. The Davies cottage came first, a small, neat building where smoke no longer rose from the chimney despite the cold. Inside, they found horror. Mr. Davies lay on a pallet near the cold fireplace, his face gray and slick with sweat. His wife huddled in the corner with their 2 children, both burning with fever. The stench of sickness filled the air. Clara moved immediately into action. Sebastian, get the fire going. Dr. Pemberton, start with the children. They're most at risk. Mrs. Davies, when did the symptoms start? 2 days ago, Your Grace. The woman's voice was a ragged whisper. We thought it was just a cold, but then... It's all right. We're here now. Clara pulled medical supplies from her bag, working with the speed of long practice. Sebastian, I need clean water. Boil it first, then let it cool enough to drink. And blankets. Strip ours from the cart. Sebastian obeyed, moving on instinct. The fire caught quickly, filling the cottage with blessed warmth. He hauled water from the well, set it to boil, retrieved every blanket from the cart. Dr. Pemberton worked on the children while Clara tended to Mr. Davies, forcing medicine between his cracked lips, bathing his face with cool cloths. The fever's too high, Pemberton muttered. If we can't break it in the next few hours... We'll break it, Clara's voice was iron. We're not losing anyone today. They worked through the afternoon. Sebastian followed Clara's rapid-fire instructions, learning to recognize the signs of crisis, to measure medicine doses, to keep the patients hydrated even when they fought against it. By sunset, Mr. Davies's fever had dropped slightly. The children still burned, but their breathing had eased. They need constant monitoring tonight, Dr. Pemberton said quietly. Someone should stay. I'll stay, Clara said immediately. Your Grace, you've been working for 12 hours. I'll stay. Her tone allowed no argument. Sebastian looked at the remaining cottages, Thompson and Miller, where more families lay sick. And the others? Dr. Pemberton's face was grave. The Thompson cottage is worse. 2 children and an infant. The Millers have 3 down with fever. Then we split up. Clara turned to Sebastian. Can you manage the Miller cottage with Dr. Pemberton? Follow his instructions exactly. Yes. Then go. I'll handle the Thompsons. Clara, an infant. You can't manage that alone. I've delivered 3 babies and saved 2 from pneumonia. I can manage. She gripped his arm, and her hand trembled slightly, the first sign of fear he'd seen in her. But Sebastian, if I send word to evacuate, you run. Don't argue. Don't hesitate. Just run. Understood? The same goes for you. I'm not leaving these people. Neither am I. They stared at each other across the smoky cottage, and Sebastian saw his own determination reflected in Clara's eyes. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The night became a blur of suffering and desperate work. Sebastian moved between the Miller cottage and the Davies cottage, carrying messages between Clara and Dr. Pemberton, fetching supplies, doing whatever was needed. At the Miller cottage, he held down a thrashing child while Pemberton forced medicine down the boy's throat. He emptied chamber pots and changed fouled bedding and spoke gentle words to terrified parents. At the Thompson cottage, where Clara fought to save an infant whose tiny body burned like a coal, he witnessed his wife's fierce determination in its purest form. Breathe, Clara commanded the baby, her voice sharp with desperation. You will breathe, do you hear me? I did not save your mother through childbirth to lose you to a fever. She worked with hands that never stopped moving, never hesitated. When the infant's breathing grew shallow, she cleared its airways with her own mouth. When the fever spiked, she packed the tiny body in cool cloths. When the parents begged her to rest, she refused. Not until the crisis passes. Not until I know this child will live. Sebastian watched her and felt something crack open in his chest. This was nobility. Not titles or bloodlines or ancient names, but this, the willingness to fight death itself for a tenant farmer's infant, the refusal to accept that some lives mattered less than others. Near midnight, the infant's fever broke. The baby wailed, a strong, angry sound, and Clara sagged with relief. "She'll live," she whispered. "Thank heaven, she'll live." Mrs. Thompson sobbed, clutching Clara's hands. "You saved her! Your Grace, you saved my baby!" Clara smiled wearily. "We're not done yet. She needs monitoring through the night. I'll stay." "Your Grace, you haven't slept in—" "I'll stay," Clara repeated firmly. Sebastian knelt beside her. "Then I'll stay too." She looked at him, exhaustion written in every line of her face. "You don't have to." "I know. I want to." They worked through the night in shifts, one monitoring the baby while the other checked on the other sick families. By dawn, the crisis had passed in all 3 cottages. Fevers were dropping, children were drinking broth. The immediate danger had receded, but as the sun rose, a new rider appeared. Young Thomas, the stable boy, his face pale with fear. "Your Grace, it's spread to the South Village. 6 more families sick, maybe more by now, and—" He swallowed hard. "And it's reached the manor. 3 of the kitchen staff have fallen ill." Clara's face went white. "How long ago?" "Mrs. Wickham sent me an hour past. She's quarantined them in the old servants' wing, but—" Clara was already moving, climbing onto the cart. "Sebastian, stay here. Eh? Make sure these families continue receiving care. I have to get back to the manor." "I'm coming with you." "Someone needs to coordinate the village response. Dr. Pemberton can do that. You need help at the manor, and I'm coming." They rode hard through the morning mist, the cart rattling over rutted roads. Sebastian saw the fear in Clara's face, not for herself, but for the servants she'd promised to protect. At the manor, controlled chaos reigned. Mrs. Wickham had indeed quarantined the sick servants, but more were showing symptoms. The scullery maid, 2 footmen. Annie, Clara's own maid. Clara moved through the manor like a general marshalling troops. "Separate the sick from the well, clean water only, boiled and cooled. Anyone showing symptoms goes to quarantine immediately, and send word to every family in the village. If they have fever, they stay home. We cannot let this spread further." For 3 days and nights, they fought the fever. Clara barely slept, moving from sick room to sick room, administering medicine, monitoring symptoms, refusing to let anyone die on her watch. Sebastian worked beside her, learning to recognize the disease's patterns, to calculate dosages, to provide comfort when medicine failed. He held the hands of dying servants and spoke words of reassurance he didn't feel. The death toll began to rise. Old Mr. Peters, the carpenter who'd worked on the cottages, died on the 2nd day. Mrs. Davies, despite their best efforts, followed on the 3rd. A young mother in the South Village lost her battle on the 4th day, leaving 3 children orphaned. Each death hit Clara like a physical blow, but she never stopped working, never stopped fighting. On the 5th day, Sebastian found her in the quarantine wing, sitting beside Annie's bed. The young maid was barely conscious, her fever raging. "Clara," Sebastian touched her shoulder gently. "You need to rest. You've been awake for 2 days straight." "I can't lose her," Clara's voice broke. "Annie trusted me. She came to work here because I promised she'd be safe, that she'd be cared for. If she dies, she won't die. Not if you keep fighting for her." "What if fighting isn't enough? What if I'm not enough?" Clara's composure finally shattered, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I could save everyone. I thought if I just worked hard enough, cared enough, planned enough. But people are dying, Sebastian. Despite everything I've done, they're dying." Sebastian pulled her into his arms, and for the first time she didn't resist. She collapsed against him, exhausted and heartbroken, while around them the manor groaned with sickness. "You've saved dozens," he said quietly. "The cottages you improved? Those families had strength to fight the fever because they were warm and well-fed. The medicine you stockpiled saved lives. The school you built gave children knowledge of hygiene that slowed the spread. You can't save everyone, Clara, but you've saved so many. It doesn't feel like enough. It never will. But it's everything." They sat together in the dim quarantine room, holding each other while Annie fought for her life, and the fever raged through the village beyond the manor walls. By the 7th day, the crisis began to turn. New cases slowed, fevers broke, the dying stopped dying, and the living began to recover. Annie opened her eyes on the 8th day and whispered,
Your Grace? Clara, who'd barely left the girl's side, grabbed her hand. I'm here. You're going to be fine. You stayed. Of course I stayed. The village began to heal, but the scars remained. 13 dead in total. Dozens more weakened and struggling. Families torn apart, children orphaned. Clara organized funerals, arranged for the care of orphans, ensured widows and widowers received support. She moved through the aftermath with the same fierce determination she'd shown during the crisis itself. But Sebastian saw the cost in her eyes. The weight of every life lost. The burden of responsibility that never lifted. On the 10th day, as the last quarantine restrictions were lifted, Clara stood in the manor gardens and stared at the village below. Her dress hung loose. She'd lost weight during the crisis. Her face was pale, dark circles beneath her eyes. Sebastian joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. Mrs. Wickham says you haven't eaten today. I'm not hungry. Drink anyway. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. Clara took the cup but didn't drink. 13 people, Sebastian. 13 lives I couldn't save. And 73 lives you did save. Dr. Pemberton told me the death toll would have been triple that without your preparation and response. That doesn't bring back the 13. No, it doesn't. Sebastian set down his cup and took her hand. But it means something to the 73. It means something to their families. Your work saved lives, Clara. Measurable, provable, real lives. She finally looked at him, and he saw the change in her eyes. During the fever crisis, something had shifted between them. They'd fought side by side, shared the burden of impossible decisions, held each other through grief and exhaustion. They were no longer strangers. You stayed, Clara said quietly, through all of it. Even when I gave you chances to leave, you stayed. Where else would I be? London, your club, Lady Penelope's bed. Sebastian flinched at the accuracy of the accusation. That life seems very far away now. Does it? Or will it call you back when things here become routine again? I don't know, he admitted. I don't know what I am anymore. The man who left here 2 years ago wouldn't recognize the man standing here now. You've changed me, Clara. This place has changed me. Change is easy during crisis. Maintaining change when life returns to normal, that's the real test. Before Sebastian could respond, Thomas appeared running up the path, his face urgent. Your Grace, writers from London. They say it's important. They're asking for the Duke. Claire and Sebastian exchanged glances. Sebastian had sent no word to London, had made no arrangements. Who would come looking for him here? They walked to the front of the manor where 3 riders waited, all wearing the livery of the Ashford family, Lady Penelope's family. The lead rider dismounted and bowed. Your Grace, I bring urgent news from London. The Earl of Ashford has died. Lady Penelope has invoked your promise of support and requests your immediate return to London. The family is in crisis, and she says you alone can help navigate the social and financial complications of the Earl's death. Sebastian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Lord Ashford had been a friend, an older man who'd mentored Sebastian in politics and society. And Penelope. He was aware of Clara standing very still beside him. When did the Earl die? Sebastian asked. 5 days ago, Your Grace. Lady Penelope has been asking for you constantly. She's distraught and says she cannot face the funeral arrangements and estate matters without your counsel. 5 days ago. During the height of the fever crisis, while Sebastian had been fighting to save his tenants' lives. I'll need to consider... Your Grace, Lady Penelope was most insistent. She said to tell you... The writer hesitated, glancing at Clara. She said to remind you of your promise, and to tell you that she needs you now more than ever. The implication was clear. Penelope wasn't just asking for his help. She was asking for him. Sebastian felt Clara's hand slip from his arm. You should go, she said quietly. Your friend needs you. Clara, London is your world, Sebastian. It always has been. These past 10 days were an aberration, a crisis that forced you to be someone you're not. But that crisis is over now, and your real life is calling you back. That's not, isn't it? Clara's voice was steady, but pain flickered in her eyes. Be honest. When that writer mentioned London, didn't part of you feel relieved? Relieved to have an excuse to return to where you belong? Sebastian opened his mouth to deny it, but he couldn't, because she was right. For just a moment he'd felt it, the pull of his old life, the temptation to escape the overwhelming responsibility of Halridge and return to the simple pleasures of London society. Clara saw the truth in his silence. She turned away. The writers will need food and rest before returning to London. Mrs. Wickham will see to it. I have work to do in the village. Clara, wait. But she was already walking away, her spine straight, her head high. The Duchess, who needed no one. Sebastian stood in the courtyard, torn between two worlds. Behind him, the riders from London waited with news of his old life, his old love, his old self. Before him, the village stretched out, a place of pain and responsibility, and a woman who'd shown him what true nobility meant. The Ashford rider cleared his throat. Your Grace? Lady Penelope said it was urgent. She's arranged for you to stay at Ashford House during the mourning period. She's counting on you. Sebastian looked at the manor, at the windows where sick servants were recovering, at the gardens Clara had built, at the village she'd saved. Then he looked toward the stables where he could see Clara's small figure climbing onto a cart to return to her endless work. Choose London, and he would slip back into the comfortable life he'd always known. Choose Halridge, and he would commit to a path that terrified him with its difficulty and permanence. But wasn't that the point? Real change was supposed to be difficult. Real commitment was supposed to be terrifying. Sebastian took a deep breath and made his choice. Tell Lady Penelope I cannot come. My place is here, with my people, helping them recover from the fever that nearly destroyed them. Send my condolences and my regrets, but I will not be returning to London. The rider's eyes widened. Your Grace, Lady Penelope will be devastated. She's relying on you. Then she will have to find strength elsewhere. My wife needs me here, and unlike Penelope, Clara doesn't have a dozen relatives and friends to support her. She has only me, and I will not abandon her again. The words hung in the air, final and irrevocable. The rider bowed stiffly. As you wish, Your Grace. I'll convey your message. Sebastian didn't wait to see them leave. He strode after Clara, catching up to her cart before she could drive away. I'm staying, he said. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. For how long? A week? A month? Until the next crisis passes and London calls again? For as long as you'll have me. For as long as it takes to prove I'm serious. For forever, if that's what it requires. She stared at him, searching his face for deception. Why? Because in 10 days of crisis, I've learned more about honor and courage and sacrifice than I learned in 30 years of privilege. Because you've shown me what it means to truly serve others. Because... He stopped, the truth too large and terrifying to speak. Because what? Sebastian met her eyes and spoke the words that would change everything. Because I'm falling in love with you, Clara. With your strength and compassion and fierce determination. With the woman who saves babies and tends the sick and refuses to let anyone be forgotten or discarded. I'm falling in love with my wife, and I don't want to go back to a life that doesn't include you. Clara's breath caught. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, very quietly, love isn't enough, Sebastian. Not without commitment. Not without being willing to do this work every single day, even when it's hard and thankless and heartbreaking. Then let me prove it. Let me stand beside you and share the burden. Let me be the partner you deserve instead of the failure I've been. And if I say no, if I say I've learned to manage alone and don't need you anymore, then I'll respect that. But I'll stay anyway, and I'll keep trying to earn your trust until I do. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and Sebastian saw the exact moment she decided to take the risk, to believe him, to hope. 1 month, she said. You stay for 1 month without complaint, without running back to London, without treating this as a temporary obligation. You work beside me every day. You learn the name of every person in this village. You carry the weight of their suffering and needs. And at the end of that month, if you still want to stay, we'll talk about what comes next. Agreed. But Sebastian, if you fail, if you leave, or prove this was just guilt or temporary infatuation, I will never forgive you. I will never trust you again. I'll continue being the Duchess of Halridge, but you will be nothing more than a name I'm legally bound to. Do you understand? I understand. Clara nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then climb up. We have 3 families to visit before dark, and I won't slow down just because you've decided to play at being useful.
Sebastian climbed onto the cart beside her, and Clara snapped the reins. They rode toward the village together, side by side, toward the endless work that awaited them. Behind them, the riders from London departed, carrying news that would shock society. The Duke of Halridge had refused to return to civilization, choosing instead to remain in the country with his merchant's daughter, wife. The scandal would be magnificent, but sitting beside Clara as they descended into the village where families still recovered from fever, where children still needed medicine and comfort, where work never ended and responsibility never lifted, Sebastian found he didn't care about scandal. He cared about the woman beside him and the life they might build together if he could prove himself worthy. The sun was setting over Halridge as they reached the first cottage. Clara climbed down with her medical bag and looked back at Sebastian. "Are you coming?" Sebastian jumped down beside her. "I'm coming, now and always." She almost smiled. Almost. It was enough. For now, it was enough. They walked into the cottage together, and the real work began. The work was relentless. Sebastian discovered this truth on his first full day working beside Clara. They rose before dawn, ate bread and tea in the kitchen with the servants, then loaded the cart with supplies and rode into the village. By the time they returned to the manor 12 hours later, Sebastian's hands were blistered, his back ached, and his head swam with the names and needs of 24 families. Clara moved through her evening routine without pause, updating ledgers, reviewing the next day's tasks with Mrs. Wickham, checking on recovering servants, while Sebastian collapsed into a chair in the library. She glanced at him from her desk. "Tired?" "Exhausted." "Good. Tomorrow will be worse. We're inspecting the winter stores and the tenant farms need their quarterly reviews." She returned to her ledger. "Get some sleep. We leave at dawn." Sebastian dragged himself upstairs, fell into bed, and slept the dreamless sleep of the utterly spent. The pattern repeated the next day, and the next, and the day after that. Sebastian learned to recognize the signs of illness before symptoms fully manifested. He learned which families needed extra support and which were too proud to ask for help. He learned the intricate web of relationships that bound the village together. Who was related to whom? Who held grudges? Who could be counted on in crisis? He learned that Clara's work wasn't occasional charity, but constant, grinding effort. She never stopped, never rested. Every decision rippled outward, affecting dozens of lives. On the 5th day, they visited the Henderson cottage to check on the baby Clara had saved during the fever outbreak. Mrs. Henderson greeted them with tears of joy. "Your Grace, and your Grace!" She curtsied to both of them. Come in, come in. Little Mary is thriving, all thanks to you." The infant was indeed healthy, pink-cheeked and fat, wailing lustily when Clara examined her. "Perfect," Clara murmured, smiling. "Absolutely perfect." Mr. Henderson approached Sebastian hesitantly. "Your Grace, I wanted to thank you for staying during the fever, for helping." He paused, struggling with words. "We didn't expect, that is, we never thought a duke would care, Twat," Sebastian finished quietly. "I should have cared long before this. I'm sorry it took a crisis to open my eyes." The farmer's weathered face showed surprise, then something like respect. "Well, you're here now, that's what matters." After they left, Clara was quiet for a long time as they drove to the next cottage. "That was well done," she said finally. "What was?" "Apologizing, acknowledging your absence. Most men of your station would never admit fault to a tenant farmer. Most men on my station are fools." Sebastian looked at the village around them, cottages he was beginning to know intimately, people whose names and stories he was learning. "I was the biggest fool of all." Clara's expression softened slightly. "You're learning. That counts for something." By the end of the first week, Sebastian's hands had developed calluses. His muscles had adjusted to the physical labor, but more importantly, he'd begun to understand the enormous scope of what Clara had built. The village wasn't just surviving, it was developing systems of mutual support that would outlast any individual crisis. The school taught children to read, but also taught hygiene and basic medicine. The herb gardens provided income, but also taught women business skills. The cottage improvements created jobs, but also trained local men in carpentry and masonry. Everything Clara did had multiple purposes: creating layers of resilience that strengthen the entire community. It's brilliant, Sebastian told her one evening as they reviewed the week's progress. You're not just helping people. You're building infrastructure that will help them help themselves. Clara looked up from her ledger, surprised by his insight. That's exactly the point. Charity makes people dependent. Opportunity makes them capable. Where did you learn this? Surely not from your father's shipping business. I learned by watching what didn't work. Clara set down her pen. My father's charity was generous but thoughtless. He'd give money to beggars, then be shocked when they remained poor. He never asked why they were begging or what would actually change their circumstances. So I learned to ask those questions, to look deeper. And Halridge became your laboratory. Halridge became my responsibility. There's a difference. She stood, moving to the window. I didn't do this to prove a theory or conduct an experiment. I did it because people were suffering and I had the resources to help, but only if I used those resources intelligently. Sebastian joined her at the window. Outside, the village lights twinkled in the darkness. You've changed this place, changed these people's lives. You realize that, don't you? I've done what any decent person would do. No, you've done what a remarkable person would do. Most people, given your circumstances, would have lived in comfortable isolation. You chose to engage, to serve, to transform. Clara turned to face him, and in the candlelight her gray eyes were luminous. And what about you, Sebastian? What have you chosen? I've chosen this. You. All of it. It's only been a week. I know. I have 3 more weeks to prove myself. He reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. But I already know the answer won't change. This is where I belong. With you. Clara's fingers tightened around his. Words are easy, Sebastian. Don't make promises you can't keep. Then watch me keep them. They stood together in the quiet library, hands linked, while the clock ticked toward another dawn and another day of endless work. The second week brought new challenges. A dispute erupted between 2 tenant farmers over water rights. One of the village children broke his arm. The school's roof began leaking. A widow discovered she was being cheated by a merchant in the market town. Sebastian watched Clara handle each crisis with calm competence, then began handling smaller issues himself under her guidance. He mediated the water dispute by proposing a shared irrigation schedule. He held the boy's hand while Dr. Pemberton set the broken bone. He accompanied Clara to confront the cheating merchant and discovered his title was useful for something other than gaining entry to exclusive clubs. You're learning quickly, Clara observed after Sebastian successfully negotiated a fair price for the widow's wool. I have an excellent teacher. Flattery won't get you anywhere. I'm not flattering you. I'm stating facts. Sebastian helped her back onto the cart. You've taught me more about leadership in 2 weeks than my father taught me in 30 years. Claire's expression clouded. Your father was a duke. Surely he understood responsibility. My father understood privilege. There's a difference. Sebastian took the reins and Clara let him, another small sign of growing trust. He taught me that being a duke meant people served you. You've taught me that being a duke means you serve them. That's not a lesson most aristocrats want to learn. Then most aristocrats are fools. Clara almost smiled. Almost. The breakthrough came during the 3rd week, on a cold morning when they visited the village school Clara had established. Sebastian had seen the building before, but never when classes were in session. Inside, 20 children of various ages sat on benches while a young woman, Miss Peters, the carpenter's daughter, led them through arithmetic lessons. The children's faces were clean, their clothes mended, their eyes bright with concentration. One little girl noticed Clara in the doorway and gasped. Your Grace! The entire class scrambled to their feet, curtsying and bowing. Miss Peters flushed. Your Grace, we didn't expect you today. The children are just... At ease, everyone, Clara smiled warmly. I came to see how you're progressing. May we observe? Of course, Your Grace. Clara and Sebastian sat at the back of the room while Miss Peters resumed her lesson. The children struggled initially, distracted by the Duchess's presence, but gradually lost themselves in the work. Sebastian watched a small boy, couldn't be more than 6, solve a multiplication problem on a slate with fierce concentration. When he got the answer right, his face lit with pride.
That's Thomas Wheeler's youngest, Clara whispered. Last year he was destined for a life in the fields, illiterate and limited. Now he has options. Because of you. Because of this school. Because someone cared enough to give these children a chance. When the lesson ended, the children gathered around Clara like flowers turning toward the sun. They showed her their work, shared their small triumphs, asked for help with difficult problems. And they included Sebastian too, once they realized he was safe to approach. Your Grace, a girl of about 8 asked shyly, is it true you helped save my ma during the fever? Sebastian recognized her. The Davies girl whose mother had been one of the first casualties. The child who was now technically an orphan, though Clara had arranged for her aunt to take her in. I helped, yes, Sebastian said gently, though her Grace did most of the work. Ma said you sat with her all night, that you held her hand when she was scared. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She said to thank you before Sebastian knelt so he was eye level with the child. Your mother was very brave, and she loved you very much. She told me so that last night. It was a small lie, but a kind one. The girl's face crumpled, and Sebastian pulled her into a hug while she sobbed against his shoulder. Over the child's head, Sebastian saw Clara watching him. Her expression had shifted. The wariness that usually shadowed her eyes had faded, replaced by something softer. When they left the school an hour later, Clara was quiet. You were good with the Davies girl, she said finally. She needed comfort. It was the least I could do. It was more than most people would do, certainly more than most aristocrats would do, Clara paused. You're changing, Sebastian. Really changing. I can see it. Is that so surprising? Honestly? Yes. I didn't think people like you could change. I thought your breeding and privilege ran too deep. People like me, Sebastian repeated. You mean selfish, ignorant aristocrats who care more about their own pleasure than their responsibilities? I wouldn't have phrased it quite so harshly. Why not? It's accurate, or at least it was. Sebastian stopped walking, forcing Clara to stop too. I was all those things, Clara. I won't pretend otherwise. But you've shown me a different way to be, a better way. And I'm trying, really trying, to become someone worthy of this estate and these people. And worthy of me? The question was soft, almost vulnerable. That most of all. They stood in the village lane, facing each other, while around them life continued. Children played, women hung washing, men worked in gardens. The ordinary miracle of a community thriving because someone had cared enough to help it thrive. 3 weeks, Clara said. You've made it 3 weeks without complaint, without running back to London, without treating this as beneath you. I didn't think you could do it. To be honest, neither did I. So what happens now? Now I finish the 4th week, and then I keep going, because this isn't about proving something to you anymore, Clara. It's about becoming who I should have been all along. Clara studied his face, searching for deception or ulterior motives. Sebastian let her look, hiding nothing. Finally she nodded. All right, then let's continue. But as they walked back toward the manor, Clara's hand found his. A small gesture, but momentous. They were becoming partners, truly partners. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. The servants began addressing Sebastian with the same warmth they showed Clara. Tenants greeted him by name. Children ran to him in the village, no longer afraid. Mrs. Wickham cornered him one evening while Clara was checking on a recovering servant. Your Grace, the housekeeper said quietly, I wanted to thank you. For what? For staying, for changing, for giving her Grace what she's always deserved, a partner who values her as much as we do. Sebastian felt heat rise in his face. I don't deserve thanks for doing what I should have done from the beginning. Perhaps not, but you're doing it now, and that matters. Mrs. Wickham's stern face softened. Her Grace has been lonely, Your Grace. She's never complained, never admitted it, but we've all seen it. She's carried this burden alone for too long. It's good she doesn't have to anymore. After Mrs. Wickham left, Sebastian stood in the corridor absorbing her words. Clara had been lonely. Of course she had. Isolated in a country estate. Married to a man who'd abandoned her,
surrounded by servants who admired her, but couldn't truly be her equals. She'd built this empire of compassion and care, but she'd done it utterly alone. Until now. The fourth week arrived, and with it came news that would change everything. A rider appeared at the manor gates bearing a letter sealed with the crest of the Duke of Thornbury. Sebastian recognized the seal immediately. Thornbury was one of the most powerful peers in England, a man whose opinion could make or break social standing. Sebastian broke the seal and read the letter with growing disbelief.
"What is it?" Clara asked, seeing his expression. "Thornbury is coming here, to Halridge Manor. He says he's heard rumors about our situation and wants to see the truth for himself." Clara's face went pale. "What kind of rumors?" "The letter doesn't specify, but someone in London has been talking about us. About you." Sebastian crumpled the letter in his fist. "They're coming in 3 days." "They?" "Thornbury and his wife. And they're bringing guests, at least a dozen members of the aristocracy who apparently want to witness the spectacle of the Duke of Halridge living like a peasant with his merchant wife." The words hung heavy in the air. This was the confrontation Clara had avoided for 2 years, the moment when London society would descend on Halridge and pass judgment on everything she'd built. "You should go," Clara said quietly. "Meet them at the gates. Explain that I'm indisposed. Play the apologetic husband with an embarrassing wife.
Save your reputation before they destroy it."
"Absolutely not."
"Sebastian, you don't understand what this means. If Thornbury decides you've debased yourself, if he spreads word that the Duke of Halridge has gone native with a tradesman's daughter, you'll be ruined socially. Every door in London will close to you." "Then let them close. I don't care." "You say that now, but when you're actually facing exile from your world, my world is here." Sebastian grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Don't you understand yet? This village, this estate, these people, this is my world now. You are my world. Let Thornbury come. Let him bring the entire aristocracy if he wants. They can see exactly what we've built here, and if they don't approve, that's their failure, not ours." Clara's eyes searched his face. "You mean that?" "I've never meant anything more in my life." "They'll mock me. Mock you for marrying me. They'll call me pretentious for acting as a real duchess when everyone knows I'm just what? Just the woman who saved this estate from ruin? Just the person who's built a thriving community from nothing? Just the most remarkable human being I've ever met?" Sebastian's voice rang with conviction. "Let them come, Clara. Let them see what a real duchess looks like. Let them see what true nobility means." Clara's composure cracked. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "I know, so am I." Sebastian pulled her close. "But we'll face them together. You won't be alone anymore. I promise you that." They stood together in the library, holding each other, while outside the autumn sun set over the estate Clara had saved and the village she'd transformed. In 3 days, the aristocracy would descend on Halridge Manor like a hostile army, ready to judge and condemn. But Clara wouldn't face them as she'd faced everything else, alone and unsupported. This time, she would have Sebastian beside her, and together they would show the world what real nobility looked like. The next 3 days were a flurry of preparation. Clara insisted they change nothing. The manor would be presented exactly as it was, with no attempt to hide or apologize for her work. "If they want to see Halridge, they'll see the real Halridge," she declared, not some sanitized version designed to protect their delicate sensibilities. But Sebastian saw the fear beneath her defiance. At night, she paced the library, too anxious to sleep. During the day, she worked with even more intensity, as if trying to complete a lifetime of work before the reckoning arrived. On the evening before Thornbury's arrival, Sebastian found Clara in the Duchess's chambers, staring at her limited wardrobe. "I don't have anything appropriate," she said flatly. "I sold most of my London gowns to fund the school. The rest are too worn or too simple for entertaining a duke and duchess." "Then wear what you always wear. You don't need elaborate gowns to prove your worth." "Don't I? These people care about appearances, about status and fashion and all the superficial markers of proper society. I have none of those things. I'm going to look exactly like what I am, a merchant's daughter, playing at being a duchess." Sebastian moved to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You're not playing at anything. You are the Duchess of Halridge. You've earned that title through 2 years of sacrifice and service.
Let them see that. They won't look past my origins long enough to see anything else. Then they're fools. But Clara, listen to me. Sebastian turned her to face him. I know these people. I've spent my entire life among them. And I'm telling you that what you've accomplished here, what you've built, is more impressive than anything they've ever done.
You've transformed an entire community. You've saved lives. You've created lasting change. That's real power, real nobility. Words won't matter to them. Then we'll show them with actions. Tomorrow, when Thornberry and his entourage arrive, we'll give them a tour of everything you've done. The school, the cottages, the gardens, the village. We'll show them the ledgers proving this estate is profitable. We'll introduce them to the people whose lives you've changed, and we'll make them see what I see, that you're extraordinary. Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And if they still reject me? Reject us? Then we'll face that together too. But Clara, I don't think they will. I think when they see what you've accomplished, they'll be forced to recognize your value. And if they don't, then they're not worth our concern. Clara leaned against him, drawing strength from his certainty. When did you become so confident? When I finally found something worth fighting for. They stood together in the fading light, two people from different worlds who'd found common ground in service and sacrifice. Tomorrow would bring judgment. But tonight, they had each other. And that, Sebastian was learning, was enough. The carriages arrived precisely at noon, a procession of elegant vehicles bearing the cream of London society. The Duke and Duchess of Thornberry led the way, followed by Lord and Lady Ashford, the Countess of Pemberton, and half a dozen other aristocrats whose names carried weight in the highest circles. Clara stood on the manor steps beside Sebastian, her spine straight and her chin high. She wore her simplest dress, dark green wool without ornamentation, and her hair in a neat bun. She looked nothing like the overdressed debutantes descending from the carriages. She looked like a woman who had more important things to do than worry about fashion. The Duchess of Thornberry, a woman known for her cutting wit and merciless social judgment, swept forward with a condescending smile. "Your Grace," she said to Sebastian, her tone dripping with false warmth. "How rustic you've become, and this must be your wife, the merchant's daughter everyone speaks of." Clara curtsied perfectly. "Your Grace, welcome to Halridge Manor. I hope your journey was pleasant. Long and tedious, I'm afraid, but we were all so curious about the rumors from town. They say you've turned the Duke of Halridge into a farmer." The Duchess's laugh was musical and cruel. "Surely that's an exaggeration." "I've turned him into nothing," Clara replied calmly. "Though he has learned to serve his people rather than simply rule them. If that makes him a farmer in your eyes, then yes, I suppose the rumors are accurate." A ripple of shock went through the assembled aristocrats. One didn't speak to the Duchess of Thornberry so directly. But Clara wasn't finished. "Since you've come all this way, perhaps you'd like to see what we've actually been doing. I'd be happy to show you around the estate." Lady Ashford stepped forward, her face sympathetic but curious. "We would indeed, Your Grace. I must confess, the stories we've heard are so contradictory. Some say you've turned Halridge into a model of enlightened management. Others say you've—" She trailed off delicately. "Say I've what?" Clara challenged. "Overstepped my station? Acted above my breeding? Pretended to be something I'm not?" "I didn't say that. But you were thinking it. Everyone here is thinking it." Clara's voice remained steady, but fire burned in her eyes. "So let me show you the truth. Then you can judge for yourselves whether a merchant's daughter has any right to call herself a duchess." She turned and walked toward the waiting carriages, not looking back to see if anyone followed. They followed. The tour became a revelation. Clara led the aristocrats through the village, narrating the improvements with calm professionalism. She showed them the school where children who would have grown up illiterate now learned mathematics and reading. She showed them the cottages that had been rebuilt from crumbling ruins into warm, secure homes. She showed them the herb gardens that provided income for village women. At each stop, Sebastian added details Clara was too modest to include: the money she'd spent from her own dowry, the personal time she'd invested, the lives she'd saved during the fever outbreak. The aristocrats grew quieter as the tour progressed. Their mocking smiles faded. Their condescending comments died away. At the school, Miss Peters had the children demonstrate their learning. The same children who would have been working in fields or begging in streets solved arithmetic problems and read passages from books with clear, confident voices. The Countess of Pemberton, a woman who prided herself on her charitable work, leaned toward Clara. "This is remarkable, Your Grace. How did you fund it?" "With my dowry and careful management of estate revenues. But surely the cost was significant, but less significant than the cost of allowing children to grow up without education or opportunity." Clara gestured to the children. "These students will be able to read contracts, calculate fair prices, understand their legal rights. They won't be easy to cheat or exploit. That's worth any amount of money." "But you're creating expectations beyond their station," Lady Ashford protested weakly. "Teaching tenant children to aspire above their birth." "I'm teaching them to think, to reason, to have choices." Clara's voice hardened. "And if that threatens the established order, then perhaps the established order deserves to be threatened." Silence fell. No one challenged her. At the final stop, the manor itself, Clara showed them the ledgers. The accounts proving that Halridge was now profitable despite all her expenditures. The documentation of increased yields, improved tenant retention, reduced poaching, and crime. "This is what proper management looks like," she said simply. "Not exploitation, not neglect, actual stewardship." The Duke of Thornbury, who'd been silent throughout the tour, finally spoke. "Your Grace, I came here expecting to find a disaster, a merchant's daughter playing at nobility while ruining a historic estate." Clara lifted her chin. "And what did you find instead?" "I found the most efficiently run estate I've seen in 30 years. I found a woman who understands agricultural economics better than most stewards I employ. I found a community that's thriving instead of merely surviving." He paused. "And I found that I've been a fool for believing birth determines worth." The words hung in the air like a benediction. The Duchess of Thornbury looked stricken. The other aristocrats shifted uncomfortably. Lady Ashford had tears in her eyes. "The Duke of Halridge is fortunate in his wife," Thornbury continued, addressing Sebastian now. "More fortunate than he likely deserved. I hope you understand that." "I do now," Sebastian replied. "It took me too long to see it, but I do now." Thornbury turned back to Clara. "Your Grace, you've accomplished something extraordinary here, and you've taught us all a lesson about what true nobility means. I'll be sharing what I've seen today with everyone in London. By the end of the season, you'll have invitations from every hostess in town." "I don't want invitations," Clara said quietly. "I want to be left alone to do my work." "Nevertheless, you'll receive them, because what you've done here is remarkable, and remarkable things deserve recognition." Thornbury bowed, actually bowed to her. "Thank you for showing us the truth." As the aristocrats departed that evening, their demeanors had completely transformed. They shook Clara's hand with genuine respect. They asked detailed questions about her methods. They promised to implement similar programs on their own estates. Lady Ashford embraced Clara warmly. "You've changed everything," she whispered. "For all of us. You've shown us what's possible." When the last carriage rolled away, Clara stood on the manor steps and allowed herself to tremble. Sebastian wrapped his arms around her. "You did it," he murmured. "You faced them down and won." "We did it," Clara corrected. "You stood with me." That made all the difference. They walked into the manor together, exhausted but victorious. The servants who'd watched the whole proceeding with anxiety now cheered. Mrs. Wickham had tears streaming down her face. "They saw you, Your Grace," the housekeeper said. "They finally saw you for who you really are." That night, Sebastian and Clara sat in the library, sharing a bottle of wine and processing everything that had happened. 4 weeks, Clara said suddenly. "You've been here 4 weeks. You've kept your promise." "I have." "And you still want to stay?" "More than ever." Clara set down her wine glass and turned to face him fully. "Then I need to tell you something. I need to be honest with you." "All right." "I'm falling in love with you too." The words rushed out as if she'd been holding them back for weeks. "I didn't want to. I fought against it. I told myself it was temporary, that you'd leave, that I couldn't trust you.
But Sebastian, you've proven me wrong. You've changed. Really, fundamentally changed. And I'm falling in love with the man you've become. Sebastian felt something unlock in his chest. Joy and relief and overwhelming gratitude all mixed together. Clara, I'm not finished. She held up a hand. I'm falling in love with you, but I'm also terrified.
Because if you leave now, if you break this trust, it will destroy me. I've built walls to protect myself for 2 years. You've made me tear them down. If you hurt me now... Sebastian silenced her with a kiss. It was their first real kiss, not the perfunctory brush of lips at their wedding, but a real kiss filled with passion and promise, and the kind of desperate tenderness that comes from nearly losing something precious before realizing its value. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I'm not leaving, Sebastian said firmly. Not ever. This is my home. You are my home. Everything I want is here. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears. Promise me. I promise. On my honor, on my title, on everything I am. I will never leave you again. We're partners now, equals. Whatever comes, we face it together. Clara kissed him again, and this time Sebastian felt the last of her walls crumble. She was letting him in fully, trusting him completely. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. They sat together in the quiet library, holding each other while the fire crackled and the manor settled around them. Outside, the village slept peacefully, warm and fed and safe, because Clara had cared enough to make it so. And now Sebastian cared too. The merchant's daughter and the Duke had become partners in the truest sense, and Halridge Manor, once dying from neglect, now thrived under their shared stewardship. The hard work would continue. The challenges wouldn't disappear, but they would face everything together now, and that changed everything. The morning after Thornberry's departure brought a clarity Sebastian had never experienced. He woke in his own chambers, the blue chambers he'd come to prefer over the grander ducal suite, and realized he'd slept deeply and dreamlessly. No anxiety gnawing at him, no restless desire to be somewhere else. For the first time in his life, Sebastian Halridge was exactly where he wanted to be. He dressed and descended to the kitchen, where Clara already sat with Mrs. Wickham, reviewing the day's tasks over tea. She looked up when he entered, and her smile transformed her entire face. "You're awake early," she said. "Couldn't sleep any longer. Too much to do." Sebastian poured himself tea and sat beside her. "What's the priority today?" Clara's eyebrows rose. "You're asking me? You're the expert. I'm still learning." "Well," Clara consulted her notes. "The winter preparations need finalizing. We're behind on storing root vegetables, and 3 cottages still need chimney repairs before the first frost. Then there's the matter of the Davies orphans. I want to ensure their aunt has adequate support. And the school needs more slates and books if we're going to expand to accommodate the younger children." Sebastian absorbed the list. 6 months ago, these details would have seemed tediously beneath him. Now they felt vital, meaningful. "I can handle the chimney repairs. I'll take Thomas Brennan and assess what's needed." "You'll get dirty," Clara warned. "I'm aware. I don't care." She studied him for a moment, then reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying. For caring. For being here." The simple gratitude in her voice made Sebastian's chest tight. "Clara, I should be thanking you. You've given me a purpose I never knew I needed, a life that actually means something." Mrs. Wickham cleared her throat delicately. "If I may, Your Graces, the servants have been talking. About yesterday. About how you stood together before those London people and showed them what Halridge truly is." The housekeeper's eyes gleamed. "We're proud to serve you, both of you." After Mrs. Wickham left, Clara turned to Sebastian with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She's right, you know. We did stand together. For the first time, we were truly a partnership. And we always will be. Even when winter comes and the work gets harder, even when the next crisis hits and we're exhausted and overwhelmed, especially then." Sebastian cupped her face in his hands. "Clara, I love you. Not the idea of you, not the convenient wife who saved my estate. You, the stubborn, brilliant, compassionate woman who transformed everything she touched. I love you, and I'm committed to this life we're building together."
Clara's breath caught. I love you too. I think I have for weeks now, but I was too afraid to admit it. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm not going anywhere. They kissed, soft and lingering, while morning light filled the kitchen and the house woke around them. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. We should get to work, Clara said reluctantly. We should, Sebastian agreed. But first, he pulled a small box from his pocket. I've been carrying this for a week, waiting for the right moment. Clara opened the box to find a simple gold ring set with a modest sapphire. Not the elaborate jewelry a duchess might expect, but something far more meaningful. It was my grandmother's, Sebastian explained. She was the only member of my family who believed in marrying for love rather than advantage. My father dismissed her as a romantic fool, but I remember her as the happiest person I knew. She'd want you to have this. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Sebastian, I can't. You already have my name and my title. Now I want you to have this too. A symbol of what we've become to each other. A real marriage, Clara. A real partnership. Will you accept it? Yes. Clara's voice broke. Yes, of course. Sebastian slipped the ring onto her finger, and Clara stared at it as if seeing proof of a miracle. I never thought I'd have this. A husband who chose me. A marriage built on more than obligation. You deserve so much more than I've given you, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Clara kissed him again, fierce and claiming. You already are. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm Sebastian had never imagined he'd enjoy. He and Clara worked side by side every day, managing the estate, solving problems, planning for the future. The physical labor exhausted him, but in a good way. His body grew stronger, his hands more capable. More importantly, his relationship with the village deepened. The tenants who'd once viewed him with wary distance now greeted him warmly. Children ran to him in the street. Mothers trusted him to hold their babies. Old men sought his counsel on disputes. He was earning something his title had never given him, genuine respect. One afternoon, while repairing a fence with Mr. Henderson, the farmer spoke quietly. Your Grace, I want you to know we're grateful for what you and Her Grace have done, but especially for what you've done. Sebastian paused, hammer in hand. What do you mean? Her Grace, she's always been good to us, from the day she arrived. But you changed, Your Grace. You came back different, and that means something to folks. Means a man can change if he wants to. Means we don't have to be trapped by what we were. The words struck deep. Sebastian had been so focused on proving himself to Clara that he hadn't considered what his transformation might mean to others. We're all capable of change, he said slowly, if we're willing to do the hard work required. Henderson nodded, satisfied, and they returned to their work in comfortable silence. That evening, Sebastian found Clara in the library working on a new project. Detailed architectural drawings covered her desk. What's this? He asked, leaning over her shoulder. A plan for expanding the school. If we build an additional classroom, we can accommodate more students and offer more advanced subjects, maybe even hire a second teacher. Clara gestured to the calculations beside the drawings. It will cost £300, but I found the money in the estate accounts. With your approval, of course. My approval? Sebastian laughed. Clara, you've been managing this estate brilliantly for 2 years without my input. You don't need my permission for anything. We're partners now. I want your input. Sebastian studied the plans carefully. The design is brilliant, but £300 is conservative. Add another 100 for books and supplies, and 50 more for a teacher's cottage. We should do this properly. Claire's face lit up. You think so? I know so. This school is the best thing you've done, and you've done many great things. Let's make it even better. They worked late into the night, refining the plans, discussing possibilities. It felt natural now, this collaboration. They challenged each other, built on each other's ideas, created something neither could have achieved alone. Around midnight, Clara set down her pen and stretched. I never thought I'd have this. Have what? A true partner. Someone who sees the work as I do, who cares about it as I do. She turned to face him. I spent 2 years building this alone, Sebastian. It was lonely.
Now it's not, and that changes everything. Sebastian pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her. You were never meant to carry this burden alone. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that.
You're here now. That's what matters.
They sat together in the quiet library, holding each other while the fire burned low. Outside, frost was beginning to touch the gardens, signaling winter's approach. There would be hard months ahead, cold and challenges and the endless work of keeping a community alive through the harsh season. But they would face it together. The announcement came in November, delivered by a messenger from London wearing the royal livery. Sebastian read the letter twice, disbelieving. Clara watched his face, growing alarmed. What is it? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Quite the opposite. Sebastian handed her the letter. The king wants to meet us. Both of us. Clara's hands trembled as she read. King George IV, influenced by the Duke of Thornbury's enthusiastic reports, had taken an interest in the Halridge estate improvements. He wanted to tour the village himself, see the school, learn about Clara's methods, and he wanted to formally recognize her contributions with a royal commendation. This can't be real, Clara whispered. The king wants to honor me? A merchant's daughter? The king wants to honor an exceptional duchess who's accomplished something remarkable. Sebastian took her hands. Clara, this is the ultimate validation. The highest authority in the land recognizing that your work matters, that you matter. I don't need the king's validation. I know you don't. But this isn't just about you. It's about showing everyone, every aristocrat who dismissed you, every person who believed birth determines worth, that they were wrong. The king himself is saying Clara Whitmore Halridge is worthy of recognition. That's powerful. Clara looked at the letter again, her expression shifting from disbelief to wonder to determination. Then we'll show him everything. The real Halridge, not some sanitized version. If the king wants to see what we've built, he'll see it all. The royal visit was scheduled for early December. Clara threw herself into preparations with characteristic intensity, but Sebastian noticed the difference now. She didn't carry the burden alone. She delegated to Mrs. Wickham, consulted with Thomas Brennan, and included Sebastian in every decision. They were truly partners now, and it showed in everything they did. The village also prepared with fierce pride. The school children practiced their demonstrations. The village women tended their gardens with extra care. The men repaired every fence and wall until the entire community gleamed. They're doing this for you, Sebastian observed as they watched workers rebuild a stone wall that didn't really need rebuilding. They're doing it for themselves, Clara corrected. They want to show the king what they've accomplished. I just gave them the opportunity. On the morning of the royal visit, Clara stood before her mirror in a new gown, the first truly elegant dress she'd owned since her wedding. It was deep blue silk, simple but beautifully cut, with Clara's grandmother's sapphire ring her only jewelry. She looked every inch a duchess. You're magnificent, Sebastian said from the doorway. Clara turned and he saw the nervousness in her eyes. What if I say something wrong? What if I embarrass you? That's impossible. You could never embarrass me. Sebastian crossed to her, taking her hands. Clara, you're about to meet the King of England. You're about to be honored by the crown. And you're terrified not of failing yourself, but of failing me. That tells me everything about who you are. I just want to make you proud. You already have. Every single day. Now go show the king what a real duchess looks like. The royal procession arrived at noon, a magnificent cavalcade of carriages and horses that seemed absurdly elaborate for the simple country estate. But when King George IV descended from his carriage, his expression was curious rather than condescending. Your Graces, he greeted them. I've heard remarkable things about Halridge Manor. I'm eager to see if the reports are accurate. Clara curtsied perfectly. Your Majesty, we're honored by your visit. If you'll follow me, I'll show you what we've accomplished. The tour was similar to the one Clara had given Thornbury, but with even more at stake. The king observed everything with sharp intelligence, asking detailed questions about costs, methods, and results. At the school, he watched the children demonstrate their learning with visible astonishment. At the herb gardens, he examined the account books showing profits. At the cottages, he spoke directly to tenants about their living conditions and received honest, enthusiastic responses. This is extraordinary, the king said as they returned to the manor. Your Grace, you've created something I've never seen on any estate in England. A true partnership between landlord and tenant. A community that thrives rather than merely survives. I had resources others lack, Your Majesty, Clara replied carefully. Money from my dowry and the estate revenues. But more importantly, I had time and freedom to experiment. Most estate managers must focus solely on profit. I had the luxury of considering human welfare alongside financial returns. And you discovered they're not mutually exclusive. Exactly. A healthy, educated, well-housed workforce is more productive than a desperate, struggling one. Investing in people yields returns just like any other investment, but the benefits extend beyond mere profit. The king nodded thoughtfully. I wish more of my nobles understood this principle. Perhaps your example will teach them. That evening, the king hosted a formal dinner at the manor. He'd brought a small retinue, but insisted that Clara and Sebastian's key people also attend. Mrs. Wickham, Thomas Brennan, Dr. Pemberton, even Miss Peters from the school. It was unprecedented. Servants and estate workers dining with royalty. But the king seemed genuinely interested in hearing from the people who'd helped transform Halridge. He questioned Brennan about agricultural techniques, discussed education with Miss Peters, asked Mrs. Wickham about household management, and he spent considerable time talking to Clara, asking detailed questions about her philosophy and methods. Your Grace, the king said finally, I've decided to do more than simply commend you. I want to create a formal program based on your model, a royal initiative to encourage estate improvements throughout England. I'd like you to lead it. Clara nearly dropped her wine glass. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not qualified to... You're the only person qualified. You've proven these methods work. You understand both the practical and humanitarian aspects, and you have the passion to inspire others. The king smiled. Of course, it would require considerable time in London, consulting with other estates, training managers. Your husband would need to support you in this. Every eye turned to Sebastian. This was the moment, the test Clara had been afraid of, a reason for Sebastian to return to London, to reclaim his old life. Sebastian didn't hesitate. If Clara chooses to accept this position, I'll support her completely. We work as partners now, Your Majesty. Where she goes, I go. What she builds, I help build. Clara's eyes met his across the table, and Sebastian saw the love and gratitude shining there. Then I accept, she said firmly, on the condition that my methods remain true to their principles. No compromises for profit, no sacrificing human welfare for aristocratic comfort. Agreed. The king raised his glass. To the Duchess of Halridge, proof that nobility is earned, not inherited. The entire table echoed the toast, and Clara fought back tears. After the king retired, Clara and Sebastian walked through the manor gardens under a sky full of stars. Frost crunched beneath their feet, and their breath misted in the cold air. You're going to change England, Sebastian said quietly. We're going to change England, Clara corrected. I can't do this without you. You could. You've proven you can do anything, but I'm grateful you want me beside you. Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. Sebastian, when you first returned to Halridge, I thought you were the same arrogant, selfish aristocrat who'd abandoned me. I was wrong. You've become someone I never imagined, someone who cares, who works, who sacrifices for others. You've become the man I always needed. I became that man because of you. You showed me what I could be. No, I showed you what you already were deep down. The capacity for change, for growth, for love, that was always in you. You just needed someone to believe in you. Sebastian kissed her, slow and deep, while around them the estate they'd saved together slept peacefully under winter stars. When they finally pulled apart, Sebastian smiled. So, we're going to transform English estate management together. Should be interesting. Terrifying, you mean? That too. But Clara, we've already done the impossible. We've turned Halridge from a dying estate into a thriving community. We've earned the respect of both royalty and common people. We've built something that will outlast us both. What's a little estate reform compared to that? Clara laughed, and the sound was pure joy. When you put it that way, it does seem manageable. They walked back toward the manor, arms linked,
discussing plans and possibilities.
The work ahead would be enormous, traveling to estates throughout England, convincing skeptical aristocrats to adopt Clara's methods, training managers, overseeing implementations, but they would face it together. Inside the manor, the servants had prepared a surprise. The entire household had gathered in the great hall, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. Mrs. Wickham stepped forward, her stern face soft with emotion. "Your Graces, we wanted to thank you properly for everything you've done, for saving this estate, for giving us dignity and hope, for showing us that service can be honorable when it's given to people worth serving." One by one, the servants presented small gifts, handmade items, each one precious in its simplicity. A carved wooden box from the carpenter, embroidered handkerchiefs from the maids, a jar of honey from the gardener's bees. Clara accepted each gift with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, all of you, but please understand, you've given me far more than I've given you. You've given me a purpose, a home, a family. I'm the one who should be grateful." Annie, fully recovered from the fever, stepped forward shyly. "Your Grace, we made something else, for both of you." She unveiled a large embroidered banner. On it, stitched in careful detail, was an image of Halridge Manor surrounded by the village, the school, the gardens, all the improvements Clara and Sebastian had made together. At the bottom, words in elegant script: Halridge Manor, where true nobility lives. Sebastian felt his own eyes burn with tears. This was what mattered. Not titles or bloodlines or social status, but this: being worthy of the people you served, being part of a community, building something that would endure. Clara gripped his hand tightly, and he knew she was thinking the same thing. That night, they stood together in the ducal chambers, Clara's rooms that had become their rooms, and looked out over the estate they'd transformed together. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Giving up London society? The balls and clubs and all the privileges you were born to?" Sebastian pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I regret nothing except the time I wasted before I understood what truly mattered. Clara, everything I want is here, with you. Even when I'm difficult and stubborn? Especially then. Your stubbornness saved this estate. Your difficulty comes from caring too much about doing things right. Those aren't flaws, they're strengths." Clara leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "I never thought I'd have this. A marriage based on love and respect. A partnership where we're truly equals. Neither did I. I thought marriage was just a transaction, a business arrangement between families. You showed me it could be so much more." They stood in comfortable silence, watching moonlight silver the frost-touched gardens. Somewhere in the village, a light still burned. Someone working late, or tending a sick child, or studying by candlelight in pursuit of a better future. Thanks to Clara, that future was possible. Thanks to Sebastian's transformation, it would continue. "We should sleep," Clara said eventually. "Tomorrow brings another full day of work." Tomorrow and every day after. Sebastian turned her in his arms. "But Clara, I want you to know, whatever challenges come, whatever obstacles we face in reforming English estates, I'll be beside you, always." "I know. That's what makes all of this possible." They climbed into bed together, holding each other as they drifted toward sleep. Outside, winter deepened its grip on the land, but inside Halridge Manor, warmth and hope prevailed. The merchant's daughter, who'd been married as a transaction, had become the Duchess of Halridge in truth, not through birth or wealth, but through dedication, compassion, and an unshakable commitment to service. And the Duke, who'd once hidden his wife in shame, now stood proudly beside her, transformed from a man of privilege into a man of purpose. Together, they would change England. Together, they would prove that true nobility came not from ancient bloodlines, but from the courage to serve others, the wisdom to see every person's worth, and the love that made sacrifice not just bearable but meaningful. As Sebastian drifted into sleep, his last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude for a woman who'd refused to accept his worst self and demanded his best. Gratitude for a second chance he hadn't deserved, but had been given anyway. Gratitude for a life that had meaning beyond pleasure or status. In the morning, they would rise and begin again. Visit cottages, solve problems, plan improvements, care for the people who depended on them. It was hard work, endless work, the kind of work that would never be finished, but it was work worth doing. And that made all the difference. Years later, historians would point to the Halridge reforms as the beginning of England's agricultural revolution, the moment when aristocrats began understanding their responsibilities extended beyond profit to include human welfare. Schools, medical care, fair wages, and decent housing became standards rather than luxuries. But those changes started in one small village, on one modest estate, with one merchant's daughter who refused to accept that some lives mattered less than others. Clara Whitmore Halridge, the Duchess who'd been hidden away like a shameful secret, became the most respected woman in England, not for her title, but for her work. And Sebastian Halridge, who'd once valued privilege above all else, became known as the Duke who proved men could change, could grow, could become worthy of the responsibilities they inherited. Their story became legend. The marriage that began as a transaction and became a true partnership. The estate that rose from ruin to become a model for all others. The love that grew not from convenience, but from shared sacrifice and mutual respect. And in the nursery of Halridge Manor, where their daughter slept peacefully under blankets embroidered by grateful servants, the future waited, bright with possibility, founded on compassion, built by two people who understood that true nobility was never about birth. It was about choice. The choice to see others suffering and refuse to look away. The choice to use privilege for service rather than exploitation. The choice to measure worth by character rather than breeding. The choice to love, truly love, someone who challenged you to become better than you were. Sebastian and Clara had made those choices. And in doing so, they'd transformed not just an estate or a village, but the very definition of what it meant to be noble. As winter stars wheeled overhead and frost painted intricate patterns on the windows, Halridge Manor stood warm and secure, a beacon of hope in a world slowly learning that true nobility was earned through service, proven through sacrifice, and measured by the lives made better through compassionate action. The hidden Duchess had been revealed. And in revealing her, England itself began to change.